It costs about $4, a glass bottle of room spray, lavender and chamomile, gemstones floating in the liquid, sold on a Walmart shelf to make a home smell calm and clean. A family in Georgia misted it into the air around their 5-year-old son, and days later, he was fighting to breathe in a hospital. His chart said COVID. 4 days after that, he was gone, and the death certificate named the wrong thing. Welcome to Diagnosis Glitch.
This story is based on documented events. All names are real. In the spring of 2021, a family in Calhoun, Georgia bought a small glass bottle off a shelf at Walmart. It cost about $4. Lavender and chamomile with little gemstones suspended in the liquid, the kind of thing marketed to make a home feel calm and clean. They misted it into the air the way millions of families mist air freshener in the kitchen, in the bedroom, around the people they love. One of those people was a 5-year-old boy named Wyatt Gibson. Wyatt was the son of a sheriff's deputy. He was 5 years old. That's almost everything the public record will give you about his ordinary life, and that scarcity is its own kind of grief because the record is loud about how he died and quiet about how he lived. What we know is this: he was a small boy in a small Georgia town in a house that smelled for a few weeks like lavender. Then, in early July of that year, Wyatt got sick. According to the lawsuit his family would later file, it started the way 100 ordinary summer illnesses start: fatigue, nausea, vomiting, weakness. Then his breathing went shallow and he grew dehydrated, and ordinary stopped being a word that applied. He was admitted to the hospital. His chart said COVID-19. It was the summer of 2021. The country was deep in the pandemic, and a child arriving feverish and struggling to breathe slotted into the most obvious diagnosis on Earth. So the doctors treated what they thought they were looking at. They treated COVID. Remember that, because the treatment for the disease they thought he had does nothing to the disease he actually had. For 4 days, they fought the wrong war. On the 4th day, Wyatt suffered a stroke, and then he was gone. 5 years old, lost in 4 days, and the certificate said COVID. It was wrong. Not a little wrong. Wrong about the entire nature of the thing that had killed him. Here's the detail that reframes everything that follows. The bacterium that ended Wyatt Gibson's life had not arrived on a virus particle in a crowded room. It had been living in the bottle on the shelf, and it was a creature that should not, by every rule of where diseases are supposed to live, have been anywhere near a child in Georgia at all. Its name is Burkholderia pseudomallei. It causes a disease called Melioidosis, and among the people who study it, it has a nickname earned over a century of fooling doctors. They call it the Great Mimicker. It's a jungle organism, a thing of warm, wet tropical soil in places like Thailand and northern Australia, and it kills by pretending to be something else. In the body, it does not stay put. It seeds itself into the lungs and looks like pneumonia. It seeds the bladder and looks like a urinary infection. It pours into the blood and looks like ordinary sepsis. It builds little pockets of infection, abscesses across the brain and the liver and the lungs and even the bone, and every one of those pockets wears the costume of a more familiar illness. In a child in 2021, the costume it chose was COVID. The Great Mimicker had walked into an American hospital wearing the most convincing disguise available, and it worked. That is what should terrify you about this organism. It does not need to be exotic to win, it only needs you to be looking at the wrong thing. And it is intrinsically resistant to many of the everyday antibiotics a doctor reaches for first. So every hour spent treating the wrong illness is an hour it spends multiplying on stopped. A wrong first guess does not just waste time, it hands the bacterium the days it needs to finish. And it finishes often. Where this disease is common, the people who study it estimate it sickens around 165,000 human beings a year and kills nearly 90,000 of them, a toll most of the world has never heard of. Even with the right drugs and a modern hospital, the death rate runs somewhere between 10 and 50% of those infected, and left untreated it climbs toward 8 and 10. Those are not numbers you survive by luck, you survive them by being recognized in time, and recognition is precisely the thing the Great Mimicker is built to deny you. For months, Wyatt's death was a closed case wearing the wrong label, but he was not alone. While a family in Georgia buried their son, 3 other strangers scattered across the country were fighting the same invisible enemy, and nobody had connected any of them yet. A 53-year-old woman in Kansas, a 4-year-old girl in Texas, a 53-year-old man in Minnesota. 4 people, 4 states, Kansas and Minnesota and Texas and Georgia, with seemingly nothing in common. 2 of them would die, the other 2 would survive in name only. To understand how 4 people in 4 states caught a tropical jungle disease in their own homes, you have to follow the second strand of the story, because the spray was the weapon, but the spray was not the only thing in this case that lied. Look at the Minnesota man. 53 years old, he arrived gravely ill, and the bacterium in his blood was doing what it does, which is everything at once. It went after his hip, it chewed through the joint, septic arthritis, tipping into a deeper infection of the bone until the bone itself began to die, a condition called osteonecrosis, dead tissue inside a living man. It went after his mind, leaving him confused, his thinking clouded in a way that would not fully clear. This was a man being eaten from the inside, and his doctors knew it. And they did the right thing. They drew his blood. They cultured it. They fed it to the machines. And here's where this stops being a story about a bottle and becomes a story about a glitch. The modern hospital lab has instruments built for exactly this moment. A device called a maldi-tof mass spectrometer can take an unknown organism and read its molecular fingerprint, matching it against a library of known pathogens, and it prints a name. Another instrument, the Haystack 2, runs its own battery of tests and prints its own name. These are the machines we trust to tell us what is trying to kill us. They are the system's eyes. The maldi-tof looked at the bacterium eating the Minnesota man alive, and it printed a name. It said the organism was Burkholderia thailandensis, a near harmless soil cousin of the real thing, an organism that essentially does not make people sick. The machine had looked at a tiger and called it a house cat. So they ran it on the Haystack 2 as well. The Haystack 2 looked at the same bacterium, the same lethal organism, and it printed a different name. It said Sphingomonas possumobilis, another low virulence environmental microbe, another reassuring nobody. 2 machines, 2 answers, both of them wrong, and both of them wrong in the same comforting direction, telling the doctors that the thing in this man's blood was not the thing that should keep them up at night. This is the diagnosis glitch in its purest form. Not a tired doctor at 3 in the morning, not a missed phone call or a lost chart. The high technology itself, the instruments specifically designed to identify the threat, looked the great Mimicker square in the eye and cleared it. The system meant to catch this disease did not just fail to catch it, it actively printed the wrong, reassuring name twice on the same patient. And the New England Journal of Medicine, which documented this outbreak, put the warning in writing for every lab in the country. Quote, with the use of identification methods such as maldi-tof mass spectrometry and 16S ribosomal RNA gene sequencing and instruments such as the Haystack 2 that are used in clinical laboratories, pseudomallei may be misidentified as another bacterium. Read that again. The machines may misidentify it. The official record now says, in effect, that the eyes of the system cannot reliably see this particular monster, and the Minnesota man, with his dying hip and his clouded mind, was the living proof his blood cultures run through 2 instruments that both told the same lie. So if the hospital machines were blind, who finally caught it? Not a faster machine, not a better algorithm, a handful of human beings at the Centers for Disease Control who refused to accept 4 unrelated mysteries and went looking for the thread. Somewhere in the data, an analyst noticed that the bacterium from these scattered patients were not just the same species, they were the same strain. Genetically nearly identical, as if they had all come from a single source, which meant this was not bad luck striking 4 families at random. This was a point of contamination somewhere out in the ordinary world, touching people in 4 different states. The strain itself carried a clue, clustering with the Burkholderia found in South Asia, which meant the source had likely been imported. Something had been manufactured overseas, shipped to America, and sold. So the CDC did something close to madness. They went into the homes of the patients and they started testing everything. Every product, every surface, every bottle under every sink. Soaps, cleaners, lotions, sprays. They were hunting a microscopic intruder hiding inside a normal house full of normal things with no idea what shape the murder weapon would take. They did not start out suspecting an air freshener. As the deputy director of the CDC division running the investigation admitted, the net they cast at first was enormous because the thing they were chasing could have been in almost anything a family touches in a day. She described the hunt in plain human terms. Quote, "We tested hundreds of specimens collected from the households of several of the patients, really looking for that needle in the haystack, and we didn't know if we'd be able to find it." They didn't know if they'd be able to find it. Sit with that. Something lethal was in American homes and had already taken at least one child, and the people hunting it could not promise themselves they would ever name the haystack, let alone the needle. And the haystack was not one house. It was 4 houses in 4 states, every shelf and cabinet in each of them, every product that might have crossed all 4 thresholds. Most outbreaks hunt at least know what kind of thing they're looking for. A bad batch of food, a contaminated water line. This one began with no shape at all, just 4 bodies and a single shared strain that insisted against all reason that something physical had touched them all. And then, in one of those homes, they found it. A bottle of aromatherapy room spray, lavender and chamomile, gemstones in the liquid, about $4. They took it to the lab, they pulled the bacterium out of the liquid inside, and they read its genetic code. It matched. The organism in the bottle and the organism that had killed the patients were the same strain down to the genome. They'd found the needle. It was an air freshener. The CDC scientist who led the broader source effort put the strangeness of it best. Quote, "When you think about the thousands of things people come in contact with around their homes, it's remarkable we were able to identify the source and confirm it in the lab." And the genetics told one more thing. The strain clustered with the Burkholderia that lives in the soil of South Asia, which meant the bottle and the bacterium hiding in it had been manufactured overseas and shipped across an ocean to be placed on an American shelf. A jungle organism had been bottled, sealed, scented, and sold, and nobody at any point in that chain knew it was there. The product was pulled, about 3,900 bottles, sold in 6 cents, across roughly 55 Walmart stores and online, were recalled. 6 cents of room spray sitting on ordinary shelves, at least some of them carrying a Tier 1 select agent, a bacterium classified by the United States government in the same regulatory category as anthrax and plague because of how lethal and how weaponizable it is. A select agent in a $4 bottle, next to the candles within reach of any child who liked the way lavender smelled. But here's the part where even the answer's not really an answer. For the 4 people who caught this, the recall came far too late. And what the recall could not do was reach back into a Georgia hospital and rewrite a death certificate while a boy was still alive to be saved. Of the 4, the count is brutal in its symmetry. The 53-year-old woman in Kansas was the very first to die, the index case, and her chart is a map of the trap. She was worked up for pneumonia and a urinary infection, treated for exactly those, while the Great Mimicker spread underneath the diagnosis. Within days, she slipped into encephalopathy, her brain swelling with the infection, and she was put on a ventilator. Her case sat unexplained for months. Remember the wrong war Wyatt's doctors fought? Every one of these patients had a version of it. The Kansas woman fought pneumonia. The Minnesota man's machines fought a harmless soil bug that was not even in his blood. And the longer each of them fought the wrong enemy, the more ground the real one took. She slid under and she died. Wyatt Gibson, 5 years old, died in 4 days under a COVID diagnosis. 2 gone. The 4-year-old girl in Texas survived, but the infection reached her brain, and months after she went home, she was still wheelchair-bound and unable to speak. The Minnesota man survived with the ruined hip and the clouded mind. Surviving this, it turns out, is its own kind of sentence. The disease does not always need to kill you to take your life away. There was one more victim in this outbreak, and it was not human. In the Texas household, the family kept a pet raccoon. At some point, the spray bottle broke and the raccoon walked through what had spilled. It did not drink it, it did not eat it, it simply walked through the puddle the way an animal walks through anything on the floor, and that was enough. About 2 weeks later, the raccoon developed acute neurological symptoms, seizures, and within 3 days, it was dead. Testing found the bacterium's DNA on the animal too, and the outbreak strain it carried held a genetic variant tied to attacking the nervous system. It was the first case of Melioidosis ever recorded in a raccoon, anywhere. And it was the household's silent canary, an animal felled by the same shelf product that had reached the little girl, a warning written in a language nobody in that house could read in time. That is where this case rests now. A boy buried under the wrong cause of death until science exhumed the truth. A girl who cannot walk or speak. A man hollowed out in a body and mind. A pet that did not survive the week. And one recalled bottle traced and confirmed the rarest of victories in a disease that almost never gets caught. The CDC found the needle. It's fair to ask what it cost to find it and whether the next needle will be found at all. Because here's what I need you to understand. The bottle is gone, but the great mimicker is not going anywhere. In a previous video on this channel, we followed a different microscopic predator, an amoeba called acanthamoeba, that turned ordinary water into a weapon and ate the eye of a young woman who simply went swimming with her contacts in, while a system that should have warned her stayed silent. That story and this one rhyme because the horror was never really the bottle or the water. The horror is that the danger had moved into the everyday, and the people whose job it was to see it could not. And with Melioidosis, the everyday is getting wider, not narrower. For most of the last century, the rule was simple. To catch this, you had to travel to the tropics. That rule is now false. In 2023, scientists confirmed for the first time that Burkholderia pseudomallei is living in the soil and water of the continental United States on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, where 3 neighbors in a single county were infected over 3 years with the identical strain matched to the dirt of one patient's own property. One of them had lived in Mississippi his entire life and had never traveled anywhere endemic. The jungle organism is now an American organism. It is in the ground. And it is the same state as Wyatt that delivers the coldest part. In Georgia, investigators recently identified a cluster of locally acquired cases stretching across 4 decades in a single county, and 2 of the most recent victims fell ill after Hurricane Helene tore through in September of 2024, dropping torrential rain on the ground where they worked. Because that is how this disease moves. Heavy rain and flooding push the bacteria up to the surface of the soil, and the warming climate is dealing out more hurricanes, more flooding, and more chances. Future victims of this infection will not be travelers with a passport stamp to explain the diagnosis. They'll be people who walked across their own wet backyard after a storm. And when they arrive at the hospital struggling to breathe, what will the system see? It will see pneumonia. It'll see a urinary infection. It will see, depending on the season, COVID or the flu. The machines that are supposed to identify the threat may still print Burkholderia thailandensis or Sphingomonas or some other reassuring nobody, and the doctors trained to ask about recent travel to Thailand will hear that the patient has not left the country, and they'll cross this disease off the list before it was ever really on it. Wyatt Gibson's family at least had a bottle to point to, a thing to recall, a needle that was found. The next family may have nothing but a backyard, a storm, and a death certificate that names the wrong thing.
The bottle is gone. The bacterium is not. It lives in American soil now, raised by floods, and the machines built to name it still print a reassuring lie. We caught it once because a family could point at a $4 bottle, but the next victims will have none. Only wet ground and a wrong diagnosis. This is Diagnosis Glitch. I will see you in the next waiting room.